Seahawks fans, wherever you may be. Welcome back for another edition of the Seahawks Playbook podcast. Join your host, Bill Alpstead, and co-host, sports writer and football analyst Keith Myers, as we talk Seahawks football. Seahawks fans, welcome back to another edition of the Seahawks Playbook podcast. I'm your host, Bill Alpstead, here with Keith Myers. And today we've got a special guest, Dan Viens of the Emerald City Sportscast is joining us today, a good friend of the show. And it's been a little while since we've had a chance to talk in person and welcome you into the show. We've got a big show for you today. The back end of the show, or two-thirds of the show, I should say, is going to be focused on free agency, kind of catching you up on everything that's been going on, including a deal that just happened right before we pushed the record button. Mm-hmm. And welcome in, Dan. Welcome in, Keith. How you guys doing?
Doing well. Always great to be on with you guys, and always great to talk Seahawks football. And we got plenty to talk about, that's for sure. Yeah, we do.
How's your show coming along? Let's go ahead and just start with your plug. How's that going for you? What you've been up to with it recently, and go ahead and tell us a little about it.
Well, I'm glad you asked. Actually, I'll let you guys break this story. So I joined the 365 Sportscast Network January 1st, new internet radio network. The guys are great. Everything about it's great. And I think that they're onto something. They're adding a lot of new hosts. They've got a lot more programming now, a lot more live programming. I have had nothing but technical issues in trying to get properly connected and being able to get all the audio squared up with my hosts. And now that things are kind of getting back to normal in my life and a lot of other people's lives, the very thing that attracted me to the network, which was the live time slot, is the very thing that has now caused me to rethink that. And so the Emerald City Sportscast is going to continue on. But as of April 1st, I'm not going to be part of the network any longer. It'll just be its own standalone podcast. Very similar to what the Dan Cave was, although I like the rebranding of it. It'll still focus more on breaking news. It'll be more timely. And in fact, not being locked in to that Wednesday, 10 o'clock Pacific time slot every week will allow me to kind of be more flexible as news happens, and also more flexible on time. That was another thing that I'd forgotten in my 25 years being away from television and radio, is being limited to that 58 minutes. Sometimes it was too much time, depending on what time of year it was, and you had to kind of use some smoke and mirrors to fill that time. And more often than not, it wasn't time enough, especially when you have someone like Bill Alpstead on, who's a very good guest, and we could have easily gone another half an hour when I had him on last month. So 2 more shows on the network, Wednesdays, 10 o'clock Pacific time, tomorrow, and then the 31st. And then look for it on the YouTube channel, on Apple, on Spotify, on all the usual places. Subscribe to the podcast. It'll just carry on. It just won't be locked into that time slot anymore.
Wow, that's fantastic. I don't know that Keith and I could ever lock into a certain amount of time.
Yeah.
We're terrible.
We consistently go long all the time. And it's because, we enjoy getting together and talking football, but there's just so much to talk about all the time. Mm-hmm. You want to be able to expand and lay your thoughts out there fully without having some sort of time restriction there. So I get that.
Yeah.
We spent like at least 2 years saying 45 minutes. That's our goal. We want to cut this off at 45, and I don't think we made it once. And then we gave up. And now
it's tough for me to do a 45 minutes by myself sometimes. When you have someone to bounce things off of, that's a real challenge. Yeah.
And we'll get into topics, and some of them run like an hour and a half. So I hear you with the 58 minutes. That would be almost impossible for Bill and I to do on a weekly basis. So I'm all about that.
So today we're going to get into the whole free agency thing. with the Seattle Seahawks specifically. I was prepared to talk about the NFC West, and then I just didn't have a chance to really update. If you guys kind of want to get into that towards the tail end, that would be fantastic. So we've got some additions to talk about on the team. We've got some subtractions, guys that ended up leaving and signing with other teams as well. And still some guys out there waiting patiently for deals to come their way. And there's an opportunity there for the Seahawks possibly to re-sign a couple of key free agents. First off, I wanted to mention the NFL and the networks and Amazon ended up reaching a new TV and streaming deal that is taking effect in 2023 through the 2033 season. It's like a $100 billion total revenue package, $10 billion a year with NBC, Fox, CBS, NFL Network, ESPN, and Amazon Prime. That's a really big deal. It does not include yet a deal for DirecTV out of market games. That is yet to have been decided or negotiated fully. I'm not sure exactly when that news comes down. It affects me personally, so I'm looking forward to hearing about what's going on there, because I am locked into this DirecTV package and have been for a while. And it would be nice to have other options. And my wife would completely agree. She is all about the streaming and the ability to get off of the IV, if you will, of the satellite and cable TV networks. So looking forward to seeing what that looks like. But that adds a tremendous amount of revenue into the league. It's not reflected yet with the current salary cap situation that we're facing in 2021, but it does give some tremendous upside and potentially a lot of flexibility into the future cap management situations with teams across the league. And we'll keep you updated on that as news comes through. So
it's nice to have it is nice to have that nailed down, so they kind of know what the revenue is going to be, at least from the TV deal side of it, so the teams can plan ahead. Because with the salary cap coming down this year for the first time like ever, knowing that there's this huge, massive increase in salary cap numbers here in just a couple of years means that all these teams that are pushing all their cap problems into the future kind of get out of jail free card. Because when the salary caps jump way up, all those huge cap hits don't matter for a year. So
yeah, it must be significant, because it's even caused the Seahawks themselves to change the way that they're doing things. We've never seen them use void years before, but just in the last couple of days, I know the Chris Carson deal, just read this morning, the Ethan Posick deal is actually a 2-year deal that looks like a 1, but there's a void year on there. And that's specifically so that they can kind of hide some of that, if you will, in next year. And that's not something John Schneider likes to do. That's how challenging this year has been for teams around the league, when John Schneider starts deferring money.
I did notice that, Dan, and I was actually somewhat surprised that they didn't do it a little bit more, given the cap challenges they currently face, and the fact they really just don't have any cap left, and they're still kind of making some deals. We don't know if
they're over
kind of been done, underneath the hood, so to speak. But nonetheless, there was an opportunity, given the fact that the salary cap next year is very large in comparison, over $100 million. Now, granted, we only have 19 or 20 players signed in 2022, so we're going to have to sign a ton of people. However, there's a lot of money there to kind of manipulate to lower cap hits this year, so that you can be competitive. I mean, with the Russell Wilson saga in the offseason, it is sort of apparent that we're in kind of a win now mode, and we have been in a win now mode. The window's open. Russell Wilson's the quarterback, but given the offseason stuff, and I'd love an opportunity to talk to you about that, Dan, because we haven't heard your take yet on the show as far as your thoughts overall, the way that the Seahawks initially approached free agency, or the offseason, I should say, and how that kind of turned on its head a little bit after the Russell Wilson news started to break, and that story continued to evolve and develop And it may be put to bed for right now, but the window seems slightly ajar yet for maybe a deal to happen during the draft. And by all means, next year, if things don't progress the way that Wilson and his camp like to see those things develop with an improved offensive line, some input on some personnel decisions, those sorts of things, we may never completely be privy to 100%, but it's clear that he wants to be more involved. And so I wanted to get your kind of general thoughts on the way that they approached the offseason, the Shane Waldron hire, what came out with the Wilson situation, how that evolved over time, how it ended with the Bears when John Schneider walked away from the potential deal that they had on the table there, and then maybe leading up to the draft, like what could happen if Seattle, and reports are out there, with like Mike Silver saying that there might be a deal still available to the Hawks if they find a quarterback in the draft that they really like, and they can work with another team to get in that position. So overall, Dan, what are your thoughts? There's a lot there.
That's a lot. There's a lot there. Yeah. Where do I start? It's been a roller coaster is really the only way to describe it. And I've kind of ridden that roller coaster. I mean, I've gone through the whole gamut of emotions as a fan and as someone who looks at the team closely. Everything from, there was a moment there where I thought, I'm just done. I'm over it. I'm over Russ and his contradictions and just some of the bizarre ways he goes about doing things, how he chose to go about his business this offseason. And I was ready to move on, but the opportunity just wasn't there. When he came out, or his agent did, and gave ESPN that updated list of 4 teams, there just wasn't a deal on that list to be made. When just literally the day before, that big piece in The Athletic that was contributed to by a bunch of really good journalists that had a different list. And that list included Miami, and it included the Jets. And then maybe you could have gotten something done. Now I'm at the point, though, because of what the team has done over the last 2 to 3 weeks, where, I was open to a deal and would be open to a deal if there was a path to bring back his successor in it, or directly after it, or as a result of it. And there just isn't, or there wasn't with the Bears deal. I would have turned it down too. I mean, as it turns out, from most of the reporting we've gotten, the 2 starters they were offering us were Kyle Fuller, who they released, and Akeem Hicks, who they've shopped around. So, 3 first-round picks, all which were going to be in the 20s, 20 this year, and if you get Russell Wilson, probably in the 20s moving forward, and a third. I'm only trading Russell Wilson if the trade gives me a pathway to begin a major and quick rebuild right now, and if it includes a young quarterback or the opportunity to get one if you like one in this draft. The Bears trade just didn't. They could have offered 5 first-round picks, and it wouldn't have made a difference. So it was the right thing to do. Is Mike Silver right? He's a connected guy. I think it's dead in the water now. At one point, I thought it was approaching 50-50 that a deal might get done. Now I think it's 10-90 because of the behavior of the team and the way that they've done some things. And we'll talk about that in a minute. But as far as the Russell Wilson thing goes, I think he's here. I think he's here for 2021. And then everything else, and you've touched on it, how much cap space they have next year. And it's because they have so few contractual obligations. They look like a team, and also by the fact that they're shying away from any deals that would commit anything beyond this year as well. They're acting like a team that's going to put everything they have into 2021, hope that Shane Waldron and Russell Wilson are the magic elixir to make that offense click, that defense essentially coming back intact with maybe one move left to be made, that they can take a shot at another division title and Super Bowl run. And if it doesn't go well, that they're in a position next year to be able to make some severe roster changes that may include the quarterback. But for now, I think Russell Wilson's a Seahawk. I think we get into 2021 with him as a Seahawk. And I think all things considered, it's the right thing for now.
Yeah, I mean, I understand your take. I completely agree with like 99% of it. Overall, you know, it was very frustrating going through that deal. It just didn't make any sense to me. I was always kind of one of those guys that was leaning more on the side of this is just kind of a public pressure campaign to influence the Seahawks, to make sure that they're doing the things that are necessary on the offensive side of the ball for Russell Wilson to be the most successful. And one of those pieces was Shane Waldron. I think that gives the Seahawks and Wilson an opportunity to improve certain things that allow him to get the ball out quicker, avoid that pass rush, add some dynamic elements to the rushing game and so forth. So
I want to see how that looks.
Yeah, I mean, it was a win-win with Pete Carroll and Russell Wilson. So I was a little caught off guard when, after that hire, all of this kind of transpired, and it just seemed like it got out of control a little bit, got its own legs, and it just kind of took off. Now that deal with the Bears, though, is backed off, I'm still hearing some things out there with Schefter, with Silver, still commenting quite frequently about the possibility this thing still could possibly be alive. Maybe not with the Bears, but possibly with a team that could provide that young quarterback or an opportunity to acquire one.
Yeah, I mean, it really comes down with that. Really, it's the Bears and the Dolphins. If either of them want Russ and they offer enough to make it happen, then this could still happen. The problem is that with all the moves and stuff that they've done in the meantime, since the Bears deal broke down and now, is how do you absorb that $9 million cap hit that you have to take? Because you actually, by trading Russ, you lose cap room by $9 million. So you have to trade Russ and also clear up $9 other million in cap space. And you know, the way that they've put these moves together and the way that they've kind of assembled the team since then, they don't really have the ability to go and
unless you cut or trade or release Jamal Adams, something like that.
Yeah, I mean that would have to be the next one. But they're already you know, the defense, the secondary doesn't have a starting cornerback in it anywhere, and so they're already hurting there. So it just feels like it's done for a year, and then we'll see what happens.
I thought if the Bears could have gotten, you mentioned the Bears in Miami, if the Bears could have gotten Miami involved a week ago, there may have been a deal there to be made, because now you're talking about Tua coming back and 2 first-round picks this year, one from each team. Even if the third pick wasn't involved, then I think you could have gotten something done. But just a straight-up trade. And then what the Seahawks have done in the last 7 days since that was reportedly turned down, they're sure acting like a team that plans on keeping their quarterback.
I'm not so sure, Dan. I think that they make these moves in a vacuum with or without Russell Wilson, to me. You're going to improve your offensive line regardless. You had 2 guys that you're essentially trying to replace. They brought back Posick. That's kind of the minimum placeholder move to me. They still might look at improving that, maybe possibly in the draft, even though they only have 3 draft picks. The Gabe Jackson trade, and we'll get into that a little bit more in just a minute. That says you're serious about improving the pass protection and the run blocking for Russ, but you're going to do that, I think, regardless, no matter which quarterback you have in the system.
It's an interesting point, because you're especially going to do that if you're going to hand the keys to a young quarterback, right?
Possibly.
So I guess.
And then Shane Waldron is a familiar guy with Gerald Everett. That was kind of easily predicted by a lot of us for the last couple months, and so on and so forth. So for me, I hear that take and I agree with it in essence, but it still doesn't completely rule out another option. In fact, Doug Farrar of the USA Today Touchdown Wire released his latest mock today. It included the blockbuster trade with Seattle and Miami. Seattle going up into the 3rd pick overall, also getting the 18th pick overall, getting Tua Tagovailoa back in a trade, and also acquiring the 36th pick, second round of this year, as well as a 2022 first round pick. Something like that may perk Seattle's interest, given the report that Mike Silver gave just yesterday, that Seattle may in fact still be kind of in this thinking if they could get a quarterback that they like in return. And so it is a possibility. I think that it shouldn't be completely dismissed outright. I agree that it would make a lot more sense for Seattle to play out. But at the same time, if you've got a quarterback that is not happy, and you're going to go through the entire year under as much scrutiny as now will be created by all of this mess, Seattle's going to be under scrutiny. The moves that John Schneider makes are going to be under scrutiny. The coaching job that Pete Carroll does on a week-to-week basis, and Shane Waldron is going to be under a spotlight. He was going to be under one anyway. Now it's going to be a big, huge spotlight under his new system and scheme.
Oh, yeah.
And Russell Wilson, he's going to be asked every week, hey, was this enough? Did you won, but you ran the ball a little bit more than you really wanted to, right?
Every incompletion he throws is going to be.
So for me, that's a huge distraction. Year-long distraction.
Mm-hmm.
If the Seahawks intend or want to avoid that, know that the writing's on the wall, that he is likely moving on, if not now, next year. They may elect to go ahead and get a jump start on that. And Pete did say that he doesn't want to rebuild, but maybe with the right pieces, the right draft capital, a young quarterback that they could build with, maybe it would be less painful and they would pull the trigger.
Why move up to 3 if you're going to take Tua back, who had some struggles last year, when if you get to 3, you could get someone like Trey Lance.
Yes.
Who might be a better prospect and a better fit for.
Or the kid from Ohio State. Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, I'd rather have Lance than Fields, but
right.
This offense,
because Tua is going to get you down the road. It's a placeholder. It's also a tradable asset. It
all depends on stuff we don't know. We know that John Schneider falls in love with quarterbacks, and we know that when he does fall in love with quarterbacks, he's usually pretty right. We know he loved Josh Allen. We know he loved Patrick Mahomes, and we don't know how he feels about Tua because they never really put any energy into scouting last year's class. We don't know how they feel about this year's class, and I'll tell you what, if that trade as written is offered, I'm really sleeping on it, and I'm trying to convince Pete of the value in this thing. And Doug's got
that number 3 pick alone. Can you imagine what John Schneider could do with that pick?
Exactly. We wouldn't be talking about the number 3 pick, and we wouldn't be talking about Rashawn Slater and Javonte Williams. I mean, this would be a scenario where you're not tearing it down and doing a long rebuild with the core you have in place. If you like Tua, and he does kind of fit that point guard mold that Pete Carroll talks about and what he likes in a quarterback. If you like him, then you could turn that 3rd and 18th pick into a bevy and rebuild both lines for the long term, and you're set. And now here you go.
Right. Mm-hmm. It would give you an opportunity to really remake your roster, but yet still be competitive right away.
Yeah. But I don't think they're going to offer that, though.
Because at that spot where they're at, I mean, if they like Tua and they want to and they want to build around him, I mean, you could get the left tackle from Oregon, who looks like an absolute stud.
Correct. I would take Sewell over Slater, that's for sure.
Yeah, and then you could actually use Brown maybe as a way to get additional draft capital and the cap space necessary to trade Russell Wilson, because you'd have to do that. But again, I don't see it happening. I think the way that they've gone about their business since that Bears deal broke down was in a way that they are operating like Wilson's their quarterback. They're going to go through this year, see what happens, and then make a play next year. If everything goes great, that has a way of curing any bad blood between people, and they can just go on. If things don't go well, they trade him and they rebuild after.
Well, my question then is, can we do enough with the resources we currently have? No cap left. We're going to have to make some room there. We still have some serious holes on the roster. We'll talk about that. Are we in a position to do enough to be competitive enough to get deeper into the playoffs with Russell Wilson this year in order to make that vision actually a reality? Or is it better to admit that you can't do it and make a move now?
Wow. Yeah, it's tough because I think most of us here tend to be optimists, and we try to look for reasons to think the team can compete. As you're asking that question, I'm thinking to myself, there's a lot of ifs, and everything would have to go right. I mean, that roster would have to be healthy, and the veterans would all have to stay healthy. The young guys would have to take a step up. They'd still have to add a couple of pieces. Russell would have to mesh with the new offense, and they'd have to play great game in, game out. But I feel like I've felt that the last 3 years too, and they just went 12-4 and won the division. I think they're counting on a couple of things. I think they're counting on that offense being better for Russell Wilson at this point in his career. I agree with that, potentially. I think they're counting on the offensive line being better. And to me, that Gabe Jackson trade really changed the offseason for them in my eyes. And I think they're counting on having fans back in the stands and the impact that's going to have on their home field advantage again, especially when you look at their home lineup. You can say the Rams got better. You can say the 49ers with Bosa getting healthy and adding to their offensive line, but we still don't know what they're doing at quarterback. I still don't know what to think of the Arizona Cardinals.
I don't think the Arizona Cardinals are a huge threat until they make a change at head coach and get a guy that knows what he's doing. That's
kind of the way I feel too. So I still think they have a chance to win the division. The question is, can they go further than that? Can they go deeper in that? We really won't know until we see how the offense looks.
So let's get into the free agency discussion. We've been talking about it on the periphery here now for about 15 minutes. Let's dive into it. The Seahawks opened up basically free agency right before free agency started by letting Carlos Dunlap go. That freed up $14 million of cap space. That move was fairly well predicted. It could have come as a result of a restructure or a extension. They elected to outright release him. I think the difference in what the Seahawks valued him at versus what he was going to get paid was just too large of a gap. And so by releasing him, they got the immediate cap relief as well as kind of reset that structure there so that when he did come back, if he was still available, he could come back at a much, much lower number there. So the team cap space then entering free agency was $17 million. Seahawks made some initial moves and lost some initial players right out of the gate. What are your thoughts overall, Dan, on who the Seahawks have lost? And how do you feel about those players and the deals they were able to get elsewhere?
Okay, this is going to be fun, and I'll tell you why in a second. So when the Dunlap news first broke, my first reaction was fear, really. I mean, and the return of Jamal Adams and how they kind of started using him and the adjustments the defense made at the midway point, coupled with the arrival of Carlos Dunlap, transformed that defense. And he was just such a perfect fit off the field, on the field. And I was really looking forward to seeing him, as I said, in a full Lumen field with all the 12s going crazy. And
he just makes everybody around him better as well.
Absolutely. But the move made a lot of sense. And now you see what's happened with the edge market. And he's still out there, but so are 10 other guys that we would probably all agree we would like to have if we can't get Carlos Dunlap back. There's been growing reports, including Jake Heaps here said 2 days ago from a league source that he feels like there's momentum towards getting Dunlap and KJ Wright back. But what they did with that money, and they went out and kind of spread it around, and it enabled them to get Gabe Jackson and to sign Gerald Everett, and we can talk about each of those individually. But as far as the pass rush goes, I thought, God, here we are again. I mean, we still don't know what we have in Darrell Taylor, although we're encouraged by the reports of how healthy he was at the end of the year. We saw some flashes out of Alton Robinson, but, there's questions about whether he's an every down player. LJ Collier took a big step forward. But I don't know about his ceiling, and so that Dunlap gave you that one veteran guy that you could count on that could really cause problems. And really the only guy on the roster, until we find out about Taylor, that can just beat a good offensive lineman one-on-one. Well, now, and we talked about my show earlier, and there are advantages to being live, guys. We had some breaking news just before you hit record that Benson Mayowa is coming back on a 2-year deal. Played extremely well the second half of the season, but in conjunction with Carlos Dunlap.
Yes, absolutely.
He's not an every down guy. And when they were asking him to be an every down guy and to, play against the run and do those things, he wasn't very effective. When you give him a situation where his job is to get to the quarterback and not worry about ever doing anything else, he can be really effective. And that's the role that he got into at the end of the year when he played well.
But can I share some more breaking news with you?
Yeah.
And of course,
absolutely.
this show won't be on for a couple hours, but I don't think Carlos Dunlap's coming back. The Seahawks have signed, they have agreed to a 3-year deal with Kerry Hyder.
Oh.
Former 49ers defensive end, 3 years, $16.5 million with another $1 million in incentive. Hyder turns 30 in May. He's jumped around a little bit, really found a home with the 49ers, had 9.5 sacks last year. He had 49 tackles, 8.5 sacks. 18 quarterback hits, 10 tackles for loss. A couple of guys that I follow on my Twitter feed have been pumping that name to me this whole offseason as a guy who fits their scheme ideally. So Kerry Hyder on a 3-year, $16.5 million deal with Mayowa sure seems like the ship has sailed on Carlos Dunlap.
Wow.
I mean, it may have, but it also depends on what happens with the market. I mean, the market is, think about getting Hader for, $5 million a year, right? I mean, that's an incredible deal. It's incredible value for his level of production. If as the market continues to dry up, because this is what Bill and I have been talking about for a few weeks now. There's more players on the market this year than there typically is, and there's about half as much salary cap room to go around. So the market's, the top players got theirs, and then the market dried up really quick. And so now you're seeing guys like Hader that would normally get $8-10 million a year, $12 million a year. This year, he just got 5, right? Dunlap's still out there. The money just dried up even more. So what happens if Dunlap comes back on a 1-year deal just to get him personally through this year where their salary cap goes down, takes a 1-year, $3 million deal or something like that, just to have a home. And have a home with a team that he likes and a scheme that he likes and a coaching staff that he likes and all.
It certainly doesn't preclude you from getting him back. But Hyder is an interesting guy because he plays both a 5-tech side based defensive end. And he can be your Leo. I'm just not so sure that Pete would view this guy as a Leo guy. Typically, I know that he wanted Dunlap to play that. Dunlap's even a bigger guy, taller and heavier.
Yeah.
But skill sets, are based on athleticism, and Dunlap was very athletic, where he was able to go around and be a primary pass rusher for the Seahawks, even though he played a base defensive end. 5-tech.
This could clear the way for us to see Collier play much more inside, which is something they like from him. Yeah.
And we just, and Rasheem Green has just been so up and down. I'm not exactly sure how I feel.
I literally always forget about him. I think that says something about his performance.
He's a guy that when he's healthy has really flashed that he could be good. But when was he healthy in the last 3 years? Like very rarely was he fully healthy and therefore able to show us what he could do.
Okay. So how do you guys feel about a defensive end lineup that has Collier and Green and now Hader? Now you've got Mayowa and you've got Taylor
and Robinson.
That's, to me, that's a okay average, maybe slightly above average potentially.
It's patchwork.
Yeah. It seems like it's what's the plan? Like what, or are they just plugging holes when?
Now you've just committed us to a 3-hour podcast.
Well, okay,
Now we're in it.
So let's hold off on the plan. Let's keep focusing on what we did do so far. So Shaquille Griffin, I want to talk to you about Shaquille, how you feel about him going to Jacksonville, signing a 3-year, $40 million deal. We'll come back to the defensive end talk and the rest of the guys. But he's one of the guys that ended up getting paid. There wasn't going to be a lot of guys. I didn't know if he would actually make that threshold, given the fact that he's had some injuries. If you really look at the advanced stats, he's just kind of an average cornerback. He got paid like a top, 7 to 10 cornerback in the league. How do you feel about that? And what did you think of Seattle saying, no thanks?
He's not worth that money when you stack him up against other corners in the league. But I can see the appeal to a team like Jacksonville. I think that's one of those classic moves where his value, given the circumstances, may have been higher to Jacksonville than it was to Seattle. We just simply couldn't afford him, and they tried. They valued him. They liked him as a player. I think we all did. But they were in it till the end. They just ultimately, I don't know if they would have gone to the Jacksonville number even if they had the salary cap room. I mean, that's top 10 cornerback money. And we all wanted that from Shaq. It just wasn't there. Would I have liked to keep him? Absolutely. If money was no object, he'd still be on the team.
What would be a fair contract to you for Seattle?
I don't know. If they pay him 10, then you don't get Gerald Everett, or maybe you can't make the move for Gabe Jackson. I think when you look at value and how quickly they pivoted to a Keller Witherspoon at $4 million a year. Well, it's not even truly it's $4 million guaranteed for 1 year. Is that right?
Correct.
I don't know if there's not $11 million a year difference in talent with those two guys.
And Witherspoon, actually
so when you compare those two moves,
yes.
I would rather take what they did.
I mean, so I think we can all agree that Quill has the higher ceiling, but he's been very inconsistent. He's been great, and he's also gotten beat over the top over and over again. For a couple of games.
He needs really strong free safety help.
Or he just needs to play within the structure and stop freelancing
That's kind of what
so
I mean.
much.
That's right.
And I think he's got the higher ceiling, but look at the way that they've played. Go watch the tape. He's got the lower floor. And what do you need out of that spot? Well, if you're a team like Seattle that values the safety positions and you play a lot of cover 3, you just need your corners to not get beat deep. If let him catch something underneath and come up and make a tackle, you know what? The difference in money, the $11 million, the difference in money there. I'm sorry, I'd rather have Witherspoon.
Yeah.
Even though I don't think Witherspoon's ever going to be a Pro Bowler, but I'd rather have him and $11 million.
Boy, we sure liked him when he came out in the draft. That's for sure.
I really liked him. He was one of my favorite guys.
Seahawk corner.
Totally.
Yeah.
Yeah, and we took his pal Tedrick Thompson instead,
which was a mistake.
And we took Griffin, and so that and here we are. Okay, so Hollister also left, tight end. Carlos Hyde at running back. There was a chance there for a little bit before Carson came back that we could have lost our number 1, number 2 guys, and we're dependent on Penny to have a career year. And that's changed a little bit now. David Moore left, no surprise there. And then Philip Dorsett didn't have a chance to get on the field with Seattle. He's hoping he gets on the field with Jacksonville. So Seahawks re-signed Chris Carson. That's the premier signing, I think. We could probably all agree on. Chris Carson comes back on a 2-year, effectively, $10.425 million, $5.5 million guaranteed. That's the important number there. And the $2.5 million cap hit for 2021 is very team friendly. How do you guys feel about Carson coming back? I know that there wasn't a lot of options out there in the veteran running back market, but he was definitely one of the best. A little concern about injuries. I think we probably all share that. But when he's in there, he's very effective and runs in the style that Pete Carroll really loves.
Well, I think ultimately the concerns about his durability are what kept his market down and allowed him ultimately to come back to the Seahawks. That was a strange one for me. I had written him off. I thought he was gone. I thought someone was going to step up and pay him. Exactly the same situation as with Quill. Someone was going to pay him more than we could afford to. We know Pete Carroll loves him, and so I'd kind of written him off. I just thought he was gone. And what do we do next? And I was intrigued by the Leonard Fournette news on the first day of free agency, where he was mulling over offers. Well, he's still mulling a week and a half later. But then once the news was announced that we were bringing him back, especially at the number that we are, okay, let's go. Because a healthy Chris Carson with an improved interior offensive line in this offense is really something you can dream on a little bit.
Yeah, and you pair that with a healthy Penny. That outside stretch
we might
zone.
finally see that duo, and we finally have an offensive coordinator. Here's another thing that has in the past, the Rams would use two backs sometimes, and I always wanted to see Carson and Penny on the field at the same time for opposing defenses to have to try to figure out. We may see that this year.
Yeah, and I think that one of the things that's missing here is, so the news came out that Seahawks were like going after Fournette, and they had made this offer and that kind of stuff. And then how long did it take after that news before they signed Chris Carson at a significantly lower value than most people thought he was going to get? Like, how much of the Leonard Fournette stuff was, you want that much? We're just going to move on. And then he came down on his ask, and they got him in a really friendly deal.
One thing that you can say about John Schneider is he's very good at identifying market values ahead of when they actually take place. I think Keith and I, we talked a little bit about the different values and different position groups as we've talked about them, and we mentioned Chris Carson as possibly going out there and getting that higher number that he wanted, the $9 million, $10 million deal. But when you really looked at the overall situation with the salary cap, other position groups of higher values out there grabbing up all of that money first, and maybe one guy getting paid in the guy from Green Bay, and Chris Carson's market just wasn't going to be there, and you can kind of see it. Yeah. But it really kind of needed to happen in order for him to really believe it, and for us. And I thought there was an outside chance there that he would come back on a 1-year deal, like at $5.5 million with Seattle. And I kind of threw that out there. Even when I said it a couple months ago, I was like, I don't know. I'm just kind of throwing it out there. But to have him actually come back at that, and even slightly less, is a great value for Seattle, and gives him an opportunity to keep going in the same system that he's comfortable with a new coordinator that's going to put him in a really nice position to have a real positive effect, I think. And I think that's good. How about Ethan Posick? We all thought probably Seahawks were going to move on. I think what happened was Seattle realized they were going to be in a pretty serious money crunch, and they needed somebody to come back. And Posick wasn't bad. He wasn't great. The team elected to kind of as a last gasp effort, similar to what they did with Britt a few years ago. They moved him from guard to center to see if he could stick there. He played some center in college. Probably should have played there from the very beginning with Seattle, but we know how that goes. And he did well enough. And so to have him back as even just a placeholder or a guy that you could count on the back end there, I thought was a pretty effective move.
Yeah, and it feels like a covering their bases move. A
hedge, right?
Yeah, they also brought Fuller back, and there's some who think that he has a legitimate shot to beat out Ethan Posick. I also saw Greg Bell of the News Tribune yesterday made a great point in parsing the words of the Seahawks in their press release about the re-signing of Ethan Posick. And they didn't talk about him as bringing back their starting center. They talked about his versatility and how he'd played all those different positions in his 3 years with the Seahawks. The the press release sure made it sound like he was a guy that was brought back as someone who could fill in at all three positions on the interior line and as a hedge against all those. Yeah, it's certainly they weren't trumpeting him as their starting center for sure. I can still see them
when you take a look at their offensive line interior offensive line roster. They've definitely got some weakness there at the guard spot as well. You've got
a lot of unknowns at those guard spots.
Right.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Right.
Yeah, because you got Haynes and Jones.
Right. And Jones is more like a tackle to the team. At least that's the way they view him. We think
Phil Haynes is great in July.
Yeah, he's great in July, and then the injuries.
And then he gets hurt. But I really want to see him on the field healthy because I still think he can be great. But how many years are we going to wait for that? One of the things with Ethan Posick is the initial report was that it was 1 year, $3 million, and you're like, okay, that's pretty cheap, and you're paying him a veteran backup money. And then it comes out that it was really a 2-year deal with the second year, automatically voided, and so it's really a 1 year, $1.1 million in terms of the cap number this year, and you're like, whoa, that is cheap. They got a guy who started most of the year last year, has all that versatility. He can play. The first 6 games last year, he was pretty dang good. Yeah. And then he got banged up a little bit and his play fell off. But there were some flashes of him being like a good NFL player.
That fall off also coincided with Simmons taking over at left guard as well. When Potty got hurt too. So
there's some thought that between Jackson and Lewis, he could be a more effective center. There's also, I wonder, if the Seahawks were to let the draft fall to them, that late second round area, there's a real glut of interior offensive linemen.
Absolutely.
A lot of the centers come off the board before 56, but there's some good guards there. And I wonder in the right scenario, if a Ben Cleveland, for instance, were to fall into their hands. We saw Damian Lewis play center for a game last year. There's some thought that he could make that move permanently, and then you could really, you talk about fortifying your interior offensive line. You put a guy like Ben Cleveland at 350 pounds at right guard who runs like he does, and move Jackson over to left guard where he played his first 3 years in the league, Damian Lewis at center. I don't know if they're planning that, but it is, I guess, an option.
That is the versatility that you can look at. Absolutely.
Yeah.
Well, and at 56, I mean, if the Ohio State center, Josh Myers is there, right? I mean, he looks like a guy that could be, you plug him in at center for the next decade and you're good to go. And, it feels like, drafting Unger again. And really get in a situation where, I mean, he's your guy. Then you got Posick for 1 year as your primary interior backup, and you've really set your line or the interior part of your line.
Because Fuller can play guard too, so you have tons of versatility there.
Yeah, I agree, and I think these are now we're getting into the area where you can see that Russell Wilson would be a little happier with this sort of situation where you've actually got some depth, quality depth. Guys that could be future starters for you on the roster. I think that's outstanding. You might have to take a look at tackle one of these years to kind of really upgrade, but we'll cross that bridge. So in addition to Ethan Posick, Nick Bellure came back on a 2-year deal, special teams guy. Thought, for the money, he's a great guy to have on your roster, high character guy. Let's talk about the outside free agents and the trade that we made. We just talked about Gabe Jackson a little bit. You mentioned that he's been over on the right side, could play on the left side. It's interesting that you brought the draft kind of into that scenario. Obviously, these are things that John Schneider and Pete Carroll are working through pretty much as we speak, all these different scenarios on how they're going to line these guys up. It seemed like maybe in Shane Waldron's system with Damian Lewis being maybe slightly more athletic than Gabe Jackson at this point in his career, that they would elect to move Lewis over or have Lewis move over to center, draft a left guard of the future and plug that hole over there. So there's a lot of opportunities to kind of massage that around a little bit. And I agree with your take there. Ben Cleveland, you got Quinn Miners out there that I think Pete Carroll is going to be fall in love with and be enamored with. I don't know if you had a chance to watch Rob Staten's interview with Quinn Miners on his on his draft blog, but he had like a really nice little 20-minute interview with Quinn Miners after the Senior Bowl. And what an impressive guy that is. So this guy is able to completely be businesslike in front of the camera and give a great interview. And on the field, he's just a complete animal. And a guy like that is very appealing. He could play either center or guard for you as well in the draft. So Gabe Jackson, talk to me about this move that Seattle made. There was a lot of, scuttle out there that they might do something or they would pull the trigger in free agency. I don't think any of us thought that they would pull the trigger, especially when they didn't free up really a lot of cap money ahead of free agency. It seemed like they were going to kind of play the market the way that they've played it in the past, waiting for those big names to come off the board, waiting for value, especially this year when value was really going to be for those patient enough to wait. And Seahawks look like they've been playing that game, but they went ahead and pulled the trigger on this deal. Why did they do it, and what were they thinking?
I think they just took advantage of an opportunity. The reports were out there that the Raiders, I don't know what the Raiders are doing, but they were basically jettisoning 4/5 of their offensive line, all talented players, and they were going to release him, and then Seattle swooped in and was able to get him in trade. To me, that changed my perception of their offseason, and they didn't stop there. To get a guy in the prime of his career, 29 years old, under contractual control for 2 more years, potentially 3 more years. We don't know. There's an assumption that they agreed to rework his deal, or he did as a condition of the trade. We just don't know that yet. This isn't a guy who's over the hill, who they had to overpay for to bring in. We remember when they went after TJ Lang, and we were all excited about that because he was such a beast. But he was 32 years old at the time with multiple concussions, and he didn't really do much after that. We kind of dodged a bullet there when he decided to go to Detroit. This is a guy in the prime of his career who excels at doing something the Seahawks badly need. He's a big dude who is he's just frankly one of the best pass protecting interior linemen in the NFL, coming off a season which he only allowed 1 sack. In the NFC West, when now you got to face J.J. Watt in the interior a lot. You got to face the 49ers and what they do, and then Aaron Donald and all those guys with the Rams. I mean, even if Russell hadn't said anything, I would have hoped they would have targeted that area of their roster for improvement. You have to, just to survive. And we still have to see what they do at center, as we just discussed. But Gabe Jackson and Damian Lewis side by side, knowing those guys are locked up and under contract for the next couple of years. We're going to find out about the tackles next year. But that gives me some solace that part of the roster is taken care of. I thought it was a great move.
Yeah, it's a great upgrade. Yeah.
I mean, you took the weakest position of the 5 on the offensive line, which was left guard, and you made it arguably the strongest. Dwayne Brown at left tackle is gonna take exception to that, and with good reason. But you
pair those 2 guys on the left side. I mean, it's all over on that side.
Yeah. And it's the best left side that the Seahawks have had since Walter Jones and that line. And you're talking about that it's just pure quality, and it's relatively affordable. They didn't give up much to get him, under team control for a couple of years, and an elite pass blocker in the middle. And this is one of those things that's always kind of bugged me about the way the Seahawks have gone up at their offensive line under Pete Carroll, is that they just assume that Russell Wilson's going to make people miss and do Russell Wilson things. But when you look at what the Saints did for Drew Brees, who's the other, at the time, the other short quarterback in the league, they put a premium on the guards in the center and the interior of the line, more so than the tackles, allowing him to step up, allowing him to not have that pressure in his face. And they really basically recognized that was what the short quarterback needed, was more help right in front of him, maybe less at tackle. And the Seahawks have never done well at giving Russell Wilson good guard play. And between Lewis last year at that draft pick and now trading for Gabe Jackson, they've finally done what they should have done, 4 or 5 years ago. And that's given Wilson good play on the interior at the guard spots.
Yeah.
All right. I like the move. I think it's a great move. I think it's a good value. I think that there's opportunity there as well to manipulate that contract. It's like a $19 million over the next couple of years, 9 point something every, each of those years. It's non-guaranteed. So if, something happens, you can move on from that. It's a nice little tradable asset if you elect to do that as well. In addition, you can take some of that money this year and rework that contract so that you can free up some cap space. And they may elect to do that as well. And that might have been part of the agreement. You mentioned Keller Witherspoon and Gerald Everett. As we were talking earlier, I think those are tremendous value picks. We talked about Witherspoon possibly being a good cornerback fit earlier this offseason, Keith, when we were talking about Griffin not coming back, possibly moving on from Dunbar, or bringing Dunbar back and still needing a quality third option on your defense. We've got Flowers back there as well. DJ Reed came on. Looks like he's going to retain a starting spot. I think Witherspoon will be given an opportunity to compete for that other spot. I also think that they may not be done yet. Dunbar could probably come back on a very inexpensive 1-year deal for them. Mm-hmm. And then they may look at corner in the draft. It's a pretty decent corner class, fairly deep all the way into the 5th or 6th round. Seahawks need to be very careful now. They've only got the 2nd round pick, a 4th and a 7th now. So not a lot of draft capital to move around in the draft. So those picks are going to really matter to them. And they may end up spending one on a corner. And an interior offensive lineman or like a guy like Walker Little, if he's still sitting there at 56, would be awfully hard to pass on a future left tackle that this team dearly needs. And without a lot of draft capital this year and no 1st round pick next year, to get a guy that could potentially step in and take over for Brown in the future would be something that they would highly consider, I would think as well. So, yeah. And then Gerald Everett, the tight end, I think that was kind of an obvious fit that we all kind of talked about for the last couple of months after Shane Waldron came. He was with the Rams. Shane Waldron was his position coach at some point, and to have that guy in taking the place essentially of Hollister, who was had a great year, but then was very inconsistent last year, along with all of the other tight ends. I'll point out, but to have Everett come in and really have an opportunity for yards after catch, which he excels in. I had a career year last year, and I think really adds a little bit of a dynamic element to the offense, especially in space. If we can scheme him open a little bit, as Shane Waldron likes to do, it's a tremendous fit and a nice little piece for Russell Wilson to have.
He's really versatile. He's a lot of fun to watch. He's even taken some direct snaps on kind of jet sweep type motion plays. I'll say this, though. I'm going to miss Jacob Hollister because he was so much fun to watch, because I swear every time he caught the ball, he was getting blasted every single time. He never got to catch the ball without people around him. But Gerald Everett just fits the offense to a T. Obviously, he's still young, really affordable contract. And I've heard some people say, well, gosh, what about Will Dissly? We really liked him, and he was finally healthy last year. What about Colby Parkinson, who was drafted last year? There's still going to be a role for those guys. The Rams made use of Everett and Tyler Higbee. And there's a lot of hand-wringing right now over the Seahawks' number 3 wide receiver position, which by default right now would be Freddie Swain, I suppose. Although I still think another Ram could be signed at some point to fill that spot. But I just have a hunch, it's just a gut feeling, that Shane Waldron is going to use Colby Parkinson in some really interesting ways. I could see him being used as a big slot more so than a tight end. He's more of a pass-catching tight end anyway, even at 6'7". And if you look at how Waldron used Cooper Kupp in the offense last year.
Absolutely.
With the Rams, more as a slot guy. and you just imagine a 6'7" Cooper Kupp. I think Parkinson can be sort of a non-traditional tight end weapon in that way too. So
Keith and I have talked exactly about that in some previous shows.
Yeah, so I mean, you really if you look at the Rams offense as a blueprint, since it's Waldron, they had their two receivers, right? They had Kupp was their kind of possession slot guy, and they had Woods on the outside, and then they did stuff with two tight ends. Mm-hmm. And really, their top four receiving weapons were the two receivers and the two tight ends. And the Seahawks have the two receivers, and now they've got the tight end weapons. They're not as dependent on that wide receiver 3 in this offense as.
So Josh,
well, they don't throw to him anyway.
Josh Reynolds was the guy for the Rams,
and he's out there.
But now you're saying we've got Tyler Lockett, we've got DK Metcalf, now we've got Everett. You've still got Disley able to move the chains as well, and then Freddie Swain didn't have a tremendous amount of opportunities last year, but when he did, he was effective, scored a couple of touchdowns. He might be looking at a bigger role this year, as opposed to going out and signing a Josh Reynolds, who we missed out on. He went to another team, but a lot of folks thought that he would have been a likely guy that we would have brought in. So you're saying maybe we're good. We're good with the weapons right now as we stand.
I mean, they're still going to add. Yeah.
Yeah.
There's a ton of wide receivers still unsigned out there. Some really interesting ones. They'll pick through that maybe after May 3rd or whenever it is, where it doesn't count against the comp formula, or after the draft, and they'll scoop up another vet or two. And there's a couple of guys on the practice squad I like, and Cody Thompson and Aaron Fuller. There's John Ursua, who's probably 32 now, even though it's his third year in the league.
He's getting close to retirement. Yeah.
He might be getting close to retirement already. But maybe Shane Waldron's the guy to finally get something out of him and unlock something out of him. So there's other talent there too. It's you called it. As prolific as that Rams offense was at times, they only featured two receivers. They drafted Jefferson in the 4th round last year. We didn't see much of him as a rookie, and Josh Reynolds was kind of a consistent wide receiver 3 there, would catch 30 or 40 balls, but I think they might be okay.
Interesting. There's a thing out there too where Russell Wilson's apparently still wanting to sign Antonio Brown.
Yeah, he's still pounding the table for that.
Yeah, it's kind of crazy. And now he did play well for Tampa. I'll give him credit. And he stayed healthy and
he did.
Stayed engaged mentally. But I'm just not sure. It's just one of those things where I'm not exactly sure why Russell Wilson is advocating for him so much.
They work out together. They're working out together right now.
Weird.
And so it is weird because he does not seem like a guy that Wilson would.
It's not a character
want to hang out with. Yeah, and
right. I mean, let's just call it what it is.
The talent is obvious. I mean, if he hadn't gone insane at that one point in his career in Pittsburgh, we'd be talking about him statistically as one of the greatest of all time by this point. Because statistically, he was on that trajectory, and then he's had 3 years now of essentially nothing, so it's fallen off. But he's that level of talent, and he and Russ get along, and I could see. Russ's point of view. He's like, give me another elite weapon. Because imagine the offense last year with, instead of Moore as wide receiver 3, you got Antonio Brown as wide receiver 3.
Or Josh Gordon. Yeah.
Right. There are those who watched him up close in Tampa last year who say that he's not as explosive as he used to be. And that's what it would come down to me is would the benefits outweigh the risk? And if he's lost that top gear and he's not the dynamic playmaker that he was before, is it worth even taking on the risk of that personality when you could get, you could bring a Josh Reynolds in, you could sign a Golden Tate and bring him back again, somebody with, better character that you're not going to have to worry about, that might be able to be productive in that spot.
Yeah. I think the people keep bringing up Golden Tate. I think with the history with him and Russ and the way that friendship fell apart, I don't think he's even on the table as an option.
They patched that up in the last couple of years.
Well,
at least publicly.
Yeah. Just people. There's wild internet rumors that are completely untrue that about stuff that went down there, but apparently, there are some friendship issues there, and they were once really tight, and then they very much weren't. And even with the acknowledgement that the internet rumors are false, I don't think that that's going to be something that's even going to be considered. Just too bad. I liked Golden Tate. I think he was fun. You want to talk about a guy good after the catch?
Yeah, there's a couple of wide receiver weapons in this draft that remind me of Golden Tate.
It's guys another deep kind of class,
like running backs, like Amari Rogers, from Clemson. I think is a kind of a Golden Tate kind of a guy. So as of today, the Seahawks, as reported by Over the Cap, are negative.
Are over the cap.
Yeah, exactly. Are negative. $2,750,000,
which isn't,
and that doesn't account for Everett, right? That Over the Cap doesn't have Everett on there yet.
I'm not sure, Dan.
Yeah,
but
or the deals we've seen today.
Nonetheless, I mean, we're within a couple of $1 million either way, and and the point being is we still have a lot of holes and some of our own free agents, unrestricted guys that maybe Seattle would consider bringing back. The market just has not developed for KJ Wright, for example. KJ Wright, I think, would be excellent candidate to come back on the roster at the right price. We've always said that. I didn't think that he would be back on a $9 or $10 million deal, but his market was never going to be that. No. But he did want to go out and at least attempt, and now his market is more likely. I mean, last year he was making 9.5, I think, for Seattle. Now it's probably going to be closer to 3 or 4 if he's lucky.
Yeah,
because it's just completely dry out there, And then Carlos Dunlap, we mentioned. Carlos Dunlap was probably looking at trying to get into a $10 million deal. I don't blame him. Seattle let him go at the 14 number because it was just not going to be where he was aligned. He's a 32-year-old guy. He's got a certain level of production now, and he wasn't going to be a $14 million guy. He was probably closer to an $8 million guy. If Seattle went out the first day of free agency and signed him to an $8 million deal, I probably wouldn't have had any complaints. I would have let, that's about right. Yeah. Now, though, because they've been so patient, that number has drastically fallen, maybe even half of that. There's just not enough money out there to pay these guys, and the defensive end market is not there. The safety market is done now that the top 2 or 3 guys have gotten paid. The wide receivers, the interior offensive linemen, on and on, running backs, everything is now way pushed down compared to where it started. So what are your thoughts on KJ Wright and Dunlap returning to the team?
Well, you guys mentioned it earlier in the show, and you might have really nailed it, because there is clarity now on the Kerry Hyder deal. So it was first reported as 3 years, $16.5 million, but now we talk about Schneider kind of opening his eyes a little bit to the new way of doing things to work around this salary cap challenge this year. Hyder's deal officially 2 years, $6.5 million. That third year is a $10 million base salary that voids.
Oh my goodness. That's a great deal for the Seahawks.
So that is an incredible deal for Seattle. Holy cow.
Absolutely. Not only do you poach, well, they're getting Joey Bosa back, or Nick Bosa, but not only do you poach San Francisco's best pass rusher, but at $3.25 million a year for 2 years, you can still bring Carlos Dunlap back and just throw all that. At one point, Pete Carroll used to love to say you can never have too many pass rushers.
He's not wrong.
And then the last 4 or 5 years, though, his actions have been, we can't.
Well, and I'm sure that the money that we just gave Ben Samayoa too we could walk away from that if we needed to.
So this is now four players that they've given, because Mayo has a void year too. It's a 4-year deal with 2 void years. So now we have 4 players that have signed with the Seahawks where they're using that void year loophole in order to lower their cap hit.
How much dead cap have we created by doing that overall?
some, but I think
we're still under $10 million of dead cap in a year where we have $120 million available.
Yeah. And we've talked about how they have 140 million essentially next year with the projected cap but now these void years are going to hit. Hyder and Mayo are going to hit in 23 and then in 24.
That's a really good cap management strategy. And, this is where the patience pays off. Fans are just not patient. You get on Twitter, everyone's complaining, everyone's pining for the biggest names. I get it. Fun names, big names, quality guys are fun to go after. And if you get one, you're like, yes, it feels good in the moment. But those deals typically don't work out. The teams that spend the most up front are usually the teams that don't win in the end.
I'll tell you what I love about this offseason so far for the Seahawks. And every year I tell myself, you saw it on my Twitter feed, I'm sure. The first day of free agency, I tell myself, Seahawks aren't going to do anything splashy. And then about 24 hours later, as a fan, I'm pissed off that they didn't do anything splashy.
Yeah, absolutely.
It happens every year.
Yeah.
But what they have done and how they've managed this every year, even last year, every year they bring in some free agents and you kind of have to look at them 2 or 3 times and go, okay, I can see how that makes some sense. Add a value. Every single move they've made this offseason, I like it. And it makes sense. And we're going to talk about the plan, later, but as far as how they're executing this offseason, aside from the Wilson stuff, is given their resources, hats off to John Schneider for what he's been able to do.
So you've been listening to Dan Viens of the Emerald City podcast, Sportscast, and just wanted to mention that again. So if you get a chance to go out there and listen to his show, I highly recommend it. He's got some great guests, great insight, a good person, and definitely a friend of the show. So
thank you.
Let's go into a little deeper conversation. Do you mind sticking around just a little bit longer? I know we're probably going to go a little long, but we usually do. So I don't have to ask Keith. He already knows.
No, I'm good.
I do need to ask you.
I literally took the night off from work for you guys. So.
Okay, there you go. Okay, this is part 1 then. We just completed part 1. Now we'll get into part 2.
All right.
Sorry. It's just so fun. It's so fun to talk to you. Okay, so beyond Dunlap, Quentin Dunbar, he just had a really difficult year last year. A lot of personal trials and tribulations. Yeah. And then, the injury that he's had for a while in the knee presented again during the season and just never really seemed right. Never really got into the defense, figured it all out. The defense really struggled mightily in the first, 5 games for sure, a little bit after that until they really righted the ship. By then, he was nearly done and out of the defense and replaced by DJ Reed. Everything just kind of seemed to come together. Is Quentin Dunbar, now that the market is completely dried up and he's probably looking at a veteran minimum deal or slightly above that, to be able to come back on a 1-year deal and prove it that, he's fixed the knee issue, whatever, he may have done in the offseason to help that. And is he still a guy that could fit into this defense, or have we kind of moved on at this point?
I don't think so at all. I think the thing we don't know is how is his knee, and I've seen some reports that it's a chronic issue, that it could be, something that just one off-season procedure doesn't fix. But I would think that the Seahawks would want to bring him back. They have a draft pick invested in him, and the fact that we saw a flash. I don't remember exactly what week we got him back. His first week, I remember he played off the ball. He was really tentative. And then his second game back, he looked really comfortable, and you could see that's an upgrade over Trey Flowers. And then the knee caught up with him, and he was never the same, and ultimately had the procedure. And it wasn't, he didn't, he got scoped. He didn't have an ACL. It wasn't a full reconstruction. The Seahawks have been the ones to oversee his physical therapy and the surgery and coming back from that. And I would think for him, it would make sense to come back because you don't want to change schemes again, after that. And this was the team that stood by you through all that personal turmoil. And so I think it makes sense on both sides. And remember when we traded for him, the thing with Dunlap or Dunbar was, where's he going to play? Because he had that versatility. Some thought he was better inside than outside, and he graded better there. So he's a guy that can play all three positions. And that's something they really don't have on the roster right now. And Witherspoon isn't a slam dunk. He's had some durability issues too. I think it makes all the sense in the world. And it might be the thing that doesn't happen until June, depending on how his rehab is going. And maybe as we get closer to the draft and John Schneider and Pete Carroll have their press availabilities and those things, and they come out from the rock that they're always hiding under in Renton. It just makes too much sense not to happen because there isn't going to be a market. No one's going to step up and give him 2 years, $10 million. So why wouldn't he come back? I think as a Seahawks fan, I'd love to see it.
It might just be that he can't pass a physical right now. I mean, no deal is signed because he can't pass a physical. So he's just out there until he's healthy enough to sign a contract. And that might be June. That might be August. Right? I just
don't want him to go to any picnics.
No.
Stay away from the picnics.
No picnics, no card games, no barbecues.
Just no friends at all. Just stay home, dude. Stay home.
Quarantine.
Yeah. So let's get into a larger conversation that we've kind of been building to a little bit in this overall conversation.
Building to or avoiding?
Yeah, no doubt. Right. Okay. So I mentioned the cap, that we're kind of upside down a little bit, or really close to being.
At this point of the year, you can't be upside down. So I know that over the cap has the Seahawks at $2 million in the red, but literally you cannot. That can't be true.
So I wanted to ask you guys about this, Keith. Maybe you might know this. What are the rules on that as far as reporting that stuff and divulging that? It's got to go through the player union, and they usually communicate it to the league, and it leaks out to some reporter. Why are we so in the dark as to what they may have done behind the scenes?
Because if it hasn't been, just because it hasn't been released doesn't mean it hasn't happened. And also what we find out is we look at these deals and we're like, we assumed that Pusick was $3 million. Well, it turned out it was 1.1. And so there's some other things there. If the Seahawks were to sign a player like Benson Mayoa, and they're over the cap or it puts them over the cap, the deal gets avoided and it's like it never happened. So the idea
they couldn't be announcing these things.
They can't be announcing these things. So we don't know why. We don't know what they've done. We don't know what the behind the scenes stuff. But I can guarantee you, by league rules, they are not over the cap right now. They are under it somehow. They've reworked somebody's deal. It might be Dwayne Brown. It could be Russ. And they've done something to get under the cap. We just don't know what it is.
Okay, so they're fine there, but nonetheless, they're close to even. Let's just call it that.
They don't have much.
They don't have much yet. They do have some notable holes to fill on the roster still. Let's talk about that. I'll just run through it really quick, and then we can have a discussion. Third wide receiver. Right now, it's Freddie Swain. We talked about maybe that works, maybe it doesn't. Backup right tackle, backup left tackle, backup guard. Phil Haynes right now. That doesn't seem quite sufficient enough. Backup quarterback, Geno Smith. Is he going to come back on a minimum deal? Probably, but right now it's left open. Starting edge rusher. Right now we've got Alton Robinson and an unproven, untested, coming off major injury, Darrell Taylor as the guys over there. We just got Hader, but that guy can play both 5-tech, maybe the Leo spot, but he's kind of heavy at 275 and 6'2", to fit that prototype over there that Pete likes. It would make a lot more sense for Dunlap. Starting either weak side or strong side linebacker, KJ Wright. We need to make a decision there. And then cornerback, we've got the DJ Reed and the Witherspoon situation. But Witherspoon seems like he's going to be given a shot, but it isn't like he was signed to be the starter definitively. So with that said, no money to really sign anybody at this point. How do we make that happen? What do you guys think overall about the way that the the salary cap's been managed, and the fact that we don't have a lot of draft capital, and did we plan well enough? Could we have planned any better given the circumstances, or are we just like every other team? This thing just kind of came down. The salary cap's been going up year after year.
Yeah.
If it had gone up this year as per normal, it would have been closer to $210 million, not 182. That's a significant difference.
Yeah, they would have been
you're
fine.
trying to adjust to.
Yeah, I hesitate to knock them not planning well enough for this year ahead of time as far as the salary cap goes, because who knew this was going to happen, right? I do think that there is another big move on the roster coming, and I didn't want to believe it. I've heard a lot of people had said it would make a lot of sense to trade Jaron Reed. Last year of his deal, second contract with the Seahawks, effective year last year, especially once Dunlap came, has proven to be an effective pass rusher from the interior when there's a solid option on the outside next to Clowney when he was healthy, or with Dunlap. I think his cap number this year is 9.5, right around 10 million. You could do a lot, especially with how they're doing these contracts now. You could do a lot with that money. That might be all it takes to kind of fill in the rest of these holes. I didn't like the idea of that because I didn't think we had enough depth there. But this idea with Hyder now, and I've already seen some speculation that he really fits more naturally, as you're saying, Bill, as the 5 technique, and that they really liked LJ Collier last year at the 3 technique a little bit more than playing him at the base end spot. They just kind of had to out of necessity. That maybe that's a full-time move coming, and Collier takes Reed's spot, and that's kind of a seamless transition, and you get the most out of Collier's ceiling, and you can trade Jaron Reed, recoup some draft capital. Don't know if you're going to get that second-round pick back for him that you spent on him. Maybe a third, maybe a fourth, and get that $10 million. I could see something like that happen. Early in the offseason, I thought trading Tyler Lockett makes sense. I wouldn't do it now.
What about
there could be extensions.
What about the overall philosophical question about where you put your resources?
Well, that's something that we've been
because if you're going to take away, you're literally going to take away a guy that's proven to be very effective. You know, he's had some up and down sort of things, but more or less we know who he is and what he can provide the team. You're going to take one of those guys away, as opposed to maybe, making some adjustments at linebacker. You know, we've invested in Bobby Wagner. We're going to pay him $17 million this year, $20 million next year. KJ Wright, we paid him last year. If he comes back, that's a little bit of an investment there. We also had a first round pick in Brooks, and then the safety position. We've got Adams, who's on the last year of his rookie deal, at $9.75 million. He's looking at wanting an extension that would pay him north of $18 million a year. The first year cap hit we can probably manipulate, but that's a long-term commitment at that spot. Diggs, we inherited his contract. It's close to $6 million this year. In addition, we drafted Blair in the second round. He really hasn't had an opportunity yet to play, and then Amadi as well. Tedrick Thompson and Leno Hill are recent players in the last 4 or 5 years that we've added to that position as well. So there's a lot of investment there in areas that are not on the defensive line or on the offensive line. How do you feel about where the team is as far as its roster building mentality?
I would sum it up by saying I hate it, but what are you going to do? It's the ultimate dilemma of the John Schneider, Pete Carroll regime. Is their plan ever since the Super Bowl win has stunk in how they've allocated their resources. Because as I would build a football team, and I think you guys probably both would too, is I would build it on both lines and work out from there. And continually restock consistently at every key position in the draft. So you always have competition. You always have a young guy coming, and you can let guys go when their payday comes and be able to manage your cap. And if someone else ready to move into their spot or have the resources year in, year out to trade a pick for a vet and the cap flexibility to fit him in. They haven't done that. They've put this thing together with duct tape and Band-Aids the last 5 years. And sometimes it feels like just throwing darts at a dartboard. But as I said earlier, you can take some years and really question what they were doing. The Bradley Sowell, Jamarcus, what was the other tackle we signed that offseason?
Marcus
was
Russell.
Jamarcus Webb.
DeMarcus Webb, Bradley Sowell. That was their solution in that offseason. What they've done this year.
Well, they did that too in years where they had probably arguably their worst drafts as well. 2017.
Yeah. And we're still paying for that. You know, we're still paying for the Malik McDowell draft. Yes. We're still paying for the Rashad Penny draft. Yes. The sins, of those drafts have come back to haunt you now.
Well, and it results in reaching and making trades that ultimately make you more difficult to be competitive long term.
And that's where it really gets scary because the plan's bad. And now for a couple of years there, it looked like the evaluation process was bad. The last couple of drafts, more promising. The last, what we've seen this offseason looks like the players they're targeting make sense. Maybe the philosophy has changed a little bit. The evaluation process has improved a little bit. It has to because, you're in the toughest division maybe in the entire league and you're trying to keep pace with those other teams. So I do think, though, when you look at next year, I think they're setting themselves up for the potential that if they have to reset things, they have the flexibility to do it next year. If this year doesn't go really well, you touched on it earlier. If this year doesn't go exceedingly well, if it's not another 12, 13 win season and at least a playoff win and Russ is happy and everything looks good, there's a potential for a reset because the resources will be there and they're trying to keep as many of those open as they can. That's what I see.
19 current players under 2022 contract and beyond. Yeah. Keith, what do you think?
Well, I was going to say that the people have been arguing against the plan. That's been kind of the thing that everyone's talking about right now, and has been for a little bit. And the plan very much is Pete Carroll's 70 years old. Well, he's 69, but he's about to turn 70. The plan is to hold this thing together and prop it up for as long as they can until it crashes. And once it crashes, he retires and they rebuild.
Well, one thing they've been able to do is they've been able to keep their contracts right. I mean, there's no real dead cap, on the books right now other than
they don't have any bad contracts.
Right. And so, I get that argument, but that hasn't shown yet on the contracts. Now it's starting to, obviously, with
but it's more about it's more about the way that they've traded their first round picks and gone after guys that are their win now moves, right? When they traded all those picks for Adams, it was to make that defense elite last year to try and make another run. And the defense started out terrible, ended up great down the stretch, but the offense fell apart. And so this year, you look at what they're doing. They went and got a Jackson to taking the weakest spot in their line and making it arguably their strongest. Right? They're doing things to fix the offense because the offense was what held them back at the end of last year. And they finally got rid of their absolutely terrible choice at offensive coordinator. But they're just going about it in a way of what do we have to do to keep this going and to give us another shot at making a deep run in the playoffs. And
is that a bad philosophy? Or is that something that's totally you can relate to and it actually makes sense?
I don't have a problem with it because what's the goal? Is the goal to make the playoffs and get ousted in the first round every year? Or is the goal to win a championship and have to deal with the fact that at some point you have to rebuild and start over? And look at the Saints. The Saints have been really close, and they were some terrible referee calls that changed the rules. They were so bad away from getting to the Super Bowl and that sort of thing. And now with Breeze retiring and all of the cap problems that they have, they're in rebuild mode, and it was going to happen eventually. But they kept that together for an extra, like, 3 or 4 years longer than what most people would have said was doable. But they made it work, and they kept it going, and they pushed it knowing that it was going to make the rebuild a little, like, more drastic. I'm okay with that. And that's what the Seahawks are doing now, is they're pushing this. They're going to make the rebuild harder in terms of how bad the team's going to look when they do have to do it. But they're keeping the window open.
Yeah. I think anytime you're going to reset away from Russell Wilson, it's going to be painful. It just is. And it's an unknown road. We've been down the road before as a franchise. It's taken a lot of years, a lot of pain, a lot of agony and suffering to get to Matt Hasselbeck and then to Russell Wilson, right? It's like, and when we go down that road again, it's just going to be a really unknown. Even if we try and attempt to get the best quarterback we can at the time, likely not going to rise to the level of Russell Wilson. And we all know that this team has been fairly well propped up by Russell Wilson for a number of years after the Super Bowl, where he's given us at least a 9-win floor. And I do think that your idea is correct, that the team is going year by year, doing the moves necessary that it thinks will give it the best opportunity to win a Super Bowl every year. Now that it just hasn't happened, but nonetheless, you're giving yourself an opportunity. You're going into the season with a roster you think has that ability. Save the pass rush the last couple of years, which has been a little confounding. I don't get that, having to rely on a trade for Clowney and then Dunlap when you knew that those issues were priorities, before the draft in that year, and you didn't take care of them. That's a little weird to me. But other than that, I think that we've done a pretty effective job overall building rosters. But at the same time, I think that the allocation of resources we just talked about in certain positions over others has been kind of, I think, where the larger mistake lies. And then entering this year with so many unknowns, knowing your draft capital was going to be down and your cap was going to be down, realizing that you were still going to have a bunch of holes to fill. Maybe this was the plan all along, and they just kind of read the market and they knew it was going to happen, and this is the way it was going to be, and they weren't going to solve some of these things until later in free agency, even way past the draft. Yeah, that could be a legitimate strategy. I get that, but it just seems like it's just a little kind of all over the place right now. To me, I don't know.
No, and I think it all comes back to draft success. If they had better drafts the last 4 years, we wouldn't be talking about a lot of this, and you wouldn't have had to trade for Jamal Adams, certainly. And they tried. It gets back to, I don't know what happened, but it seems like something in the evaluation process was amiss. Sometimes I feel like they try to get a little too cute in the draft, or they fall in love with certain players, and they're more concerned with manipulating the draft so they can get those players than just taking advantage of things that fall to them. I think there's no better example of that other than edge, which has been talked to death the last couple of years, than at cornerback, where we know that they have a specific ideal of what they like physically out of their corners. And we know that there's a unique technique that they teach their corners that not all teams do and that not all players adapt to. J.R. Reed has kind of broken that mold for them as a smaller corner, but with that in mind, and with the trouble they've had bringing veterans in, and Kerry Williams was the most infamous example of that, and how they've failed to adapt him to their system, then why don't you spend more high draft capital on corners on a consistent basis so you can get those guys in your system? Because that team early on, before the Legion of Boom was formed, there was one training camp year, maybe it was 2012 or maybe it was 13, where they had 3 or 4 corners that were cut and went on to start for other teams. They were so deep. And it was the Walter Thurman years, but there were even guys in camp that year that couldn't make the squad that went on and played key roles elsewhere. They just stopped trying to build up that depth. And, for 2 or 3 years, we really didn't have a third corner even on the roster. So,
No, that's the way I feel right now about the left tackle situation. It's we got Dwayne
we
Brown,
don't have a
but
backup.
we don't have a succession plan.
We don't. And last year I felt like it was the year to address that. And you've touched on it this year, and it wouldn't make me mad at all if they use their first pick in this year's draft as a pick for 2023 as opposed to 2022.
Yeah.
What are they going to do?
I agree.
Yeah. Well, yeah, because if they use that first pick, let's say they're at 56, they trade down to like 60, pick up another pick, and then draft Walker Little. Right? This is a guy that has franchise left tackle written all over him, but he hasn't really played in a couple of years. So you don't expect him to start in 2021, but you've got your starters lined up. But you've got a guy that you believe can be that franchise left tackle. It's a succession plan. You have it there. You're developing a guy. He's your swing tackle for a year, and then he's your starter on one side or the other. Go for it. Do it. Find a guy like that and pick that. But what happened was that when they let Tom Cable dictate the offensive line, because he was given the ability to make roster decisions on that. And then they just have never recovered from that disaster. And it's taken quite a bit of time. And really, the Damian Lewis pick was the first good offensive line draft pick they've had since Russell Okung?
Yeah.
Ever since they gave Tom Cable's, that authority, their offensive line picks were terrible.
Yeah.
And then, so they finally jettisoned him and they brought in Solari, but Solari doesn't have the same power, the same control. And so now it's been a process for them to try and find offensive linemen. Yeah. And they've made one good one.
Well, even the offensive lineman that would have been good, we jettisoned, maybe a little early. If you take a look at Affetti, we both thought Affetti would have been much better inside from the very beginning. And I think that probably would have turned out a lot better. You take a look at, I can't remember the guy's name now, but he plays for Indianapolis.
Mark Lewinsky.
And we moved on from that prematurely. So I think we made some good investments and some good picks, over time. But for whatever reason, we've struggled in that area. I think it's getting better now. I think this might be one of the best lines that Russell Wilson has had.
But it's like the old parable of the boy at the dike, right? And there's 11 holes and he only has 10 fingers. He can't plug them all. It's like every time you get them all plugged, and we've talked extensively today about how, they finally addressed the offensive line. We think it's close to being really good. With the news today, that defensive front might be really competitive. And as much as we don't like their allocation of sources, linebackers good. We're solid at safety. Maybe they're an addition or two away from being okay overall in the secondary. But what are we going to do at tackle? What are we going to do if Dwayne Brown goes down? We don't even have a backup. We can't even afford to bring Cedric Ogbuehi back right now if we wanted to. So, what happens if Brown goes down next year? They have to address that.
Yes.
At some point.
Yes. Yeah. I was going to ask you my final question would be, we've got 3 picks in the draft. What are we going to do? What is the plan this year? We haven't had any less than 8 draft picks in the last 10 years. And now we've got 3. I know it's an uncertain year and so forth, but there are a lot of good quality draft picks out there. And the right scouting department would definitely identify those. It seems like this is the year that we would really enjoy having a lot of young infusion of talent onto this team. And this is the one year that we just don't have that. Undrafted free agents will definitely come and play this year, I think. But
I think the opposite is true. That this is the year where the reason why they've traded away draft picks like crazy in this year, including when they came into the offseason with only 4, and then they instantly traded away yet another one to get Jackson, is because a bunch of teams didn't play at the college level last year. Or if they did, I mean, look at all the different games that got canceled and all the season, the seasons that were really short and all the people that opted out and everything. I think what you have is a situation where the Seahawks don't feel like they know this draft class as well as they normally
with certainty over uncertainty.
Yeah. And so you're like, why go all in the draft for this one when you don't know these players anywhere near the level that you do? You can't work them out. You only have a Zoom conversation. There's no combine. There's a lot less tape of these guys, and some of these guys are like, well, yeah, sure they played, but they haven't practiced in 2 weeks. Literally haven't practiced in 2 weeks. But then they played in a game. And so what do you get out of that tape?
Yeah.
And they go, you know what? It's already kind of a crapshoot, and now it's worse. They don't have, because the amount of information that they have to do their evaluations, they have like half of it. And so they're like, forget it. Let's go with the certainty of the players. Let's get some veteran guys that maybe we can get veteran guys kind of on the cheap, kind of like Hader and Mayo and whatnot, and fill in with those guys for this year, because otherwise you could be just drafting another Tedrick Thompson.
But that does almost ensure, to Dan's point, somewhat of a reset next year, no matter what, in essence.
Yeah. But I mean, as a team that's going year to year, just trying to figure out how to keep the window open for one more year, betting on the draft and young players when you don't know anything about them compared to normal is a bad way to prop the window open.
Which is why they really have to figure out a way to manipulate their current contracts as much as they can to continue adding in this free agency group, because there's so much value still out there, and there's so much good young value, guys that are in the prime of their career who are going to play for ridiculously low amounts of money
on the dollar. Yeah.
You have to take advantage of that to build this year's roster, knowing, and then I would use the draft for I would take future upside in this draft with what you can. If there's a trade to be made to move down a little bit from 56, I'd like to recoup another fourth.
Yep.
But 100%, I would be putting all my focus. I would be putting my focus on the offensive line. I would be trying to find a guy that can start long-term at center for you, and I'd be trying to find a guy that can start long-term at left tackle for you, maybe with the flexibility to play both tackle sides and could be comfortable on both sides in case Brown has a healthy year and you want to extend him and bring him back. That's where I would be targeting 100%. But they have to continue to take advantage of this free agent market, because they can't expect impact in the draft.
I agree.
Immediate
that is the point I kind of wanted to pull out of this part of the conversation. Was that you're right. There is no impact availability for Seattle out of this draft, unless they're just lucky, walk into it, get a guy that happens to come in and have an impact. Maybe at center, maybe that's the one spot, or a corner, or maybe a third wide receiver. Save that. I think that we are definitely looking at a future kind of philosophy as an approach this year in the draft. There's just not enough draft capital to really do anything different.
No. And I'll tell you this too. It's this offseason again speaks to how much guys still like playing in this environment and like playing for Pete Carroll and John Schneider and the culture they've built here, because look at how many players that have agreed to come back at lower numbers. A lot of times those guys forget about all the extenuating circumstances of this year with the pandemic and the effect it's had on salaries. A lot of players are so slighted when you're not extended, or you're not franchised, you're not tagged or whatever, that the ship sails for them as soon as they hit free agency, and they don't even consider going back. So we may still get a lot of that value I'm talking about from some of the players we mentioned today. We may still get Quentin Dunbar, Carlos Dunlap, Cedric Ogbuehi. A lot of those guys could still be headed back here.
Yeah, I'd be willing to bet that like Ogbuehi is a guy that is going to probably end up signing a minimum salary benefit deal
with 5 void years.
Or no, with a minimum salary benefit means that even though he's a veteran player, he counts the same as a a second-year player on the minimum, and so it's a $700,000. You can pay him like $1.2 million, but he only counts $700,000 against the salary cap on a 1-year deal, and you're like, okay.
Only the top 51 contracts count anyway.
That's only during the off season.
Okay.
Once the first year of the season begins, which is a Tuesday before week 1, all 53, all your guys on injured reserve and all of your guys in your practice squad also count.
I have a question for you. You just mentioned 53. Wasn't the roster going to increase this year a little bit?
I don't think so. It was on the table. It was being discussed, and then it just seemed that proposal seemed to die.
You have to wonder though, with because there is the possibility that even though the new TV money doesn't kick in until 2023, as you mentioned, there's reportedly the possibility that the 17th game could be added this year.
Yes.
And I think if they go to a 17th game, they have to add a couple more roster spots.
I agree.
They have to. In which case, I would think at that point, I don't know how that works with the salary cap. Wouldn't you add a couple percentage points and a couple million to the salary cap? I don't know.
I don't think so. I think you'd create 2 more roster spots and then just leave the salary cap where it is. I don't think that, and that's the reason why I don't think it happens.
You can create some sort of exclusion. You could.
Yeah, and hopefully they'll have those expanded, the flexibility rules that they had last year too, where you could call guys up from the practice squad on game day, and
that makes a lot of sense.
I like that
kind of thing. I liked that a lot too. That was, I think that essentially it expanded your roster right there.
Yep.
All right, let's wrap this thing up. We've gone a lot over, actually.
Yeah, we're way over.
This conversation is awesome.
We were just getting warmed up.
I love this conversation. You guys have any final thoughts, Keith?
I was going to say, I think the hand-wringing over process is a little much, and I think we need to focus on product rather than process, because people seem to be upset that not that they're winning, but that they're not winning the quote unquote right way. And I can't get overly hung up on the way in which they do things in terms of roster building, as long as they keep winning.
Is it enough for Russell Wilson?
I don't know. We'll ask him. And in the end, a year, if things go belly up this year, does it matter a year from now, whether we agree right now or not? Because either things go well and he's happy and he's here forever, or they trade him a year from now and they move on and the team rebuilds. Yeah,
that's exactly what we talked about last week, Keith, right? You said almost the exact same thing, and I said, what's the bottom line? The season is successful or it's not, and you said NFC Championship game.
And I still believe that. I still believe that that's the bar. They make it there, or Wilson is probably saying, you know what, maybe it's time to move on. And obviously, if Wilson gets hurt or something crazy happens, and so they don't, right, and that just becomes like a lost year, I'm not going to count that. But if this is like a few years ago when they went 9-7 and missed the playoffs, where they just lost a bunch of games they shouldn't have, and the talent's there or not there, and it's just they're not as good. Yeah,
this seems like a very consequential year overall.
Yeah,
where it's just like almost everything is on the line. Dan, what do you think?
It could determine everything. I think we're looking at a 2-year window here where things either get really good or they start over. And I think the fact that Wilson's contract ends before Pete Carroll's, which ends before John Schneider's, if 2021 goes great, and as we said earlier, they win 12, 13 games, they win a playoff game at least, they look like things are headed in the right direction going into a year where they know they'll have some flexibility to add players, then 2020, then we kind of reload, and 2022 is a go for it year, I think. But then 2023, we're talking about Russell Wilson's contract again. And at the age of 34 then, and are we going to be, is he in a physical decline? Now we're 2 years away from Carroll's contract ending. Is he going to ask for top of the range money again? Is that going to be unworkable?
Could he bring the same value?
Exactly.
Right.
Then we're talking about how it affects the head coaching position, and then we're talking about starting over. So 2021 is crucial. And I'll just say this. I think there's been a lot of stress the last 6 weeks. There's been a lot of uncertainty, but after those first few days of kind of waiting out the market, the Seahawks have been among the most active teams in the league the last week. And as I said, I like the moves they're making. I like the idea behind what they're doing and adding multiple assets to certain spots. They're certainly not done yet. We're going to see some things coming up soon. We can complain about the process all we want, but as far as just 2021 goes, I'm switching into that mode now where I'm trying to find reasons to be optimistic, and I think they're giving us some of those reasons.
Yeah, nice. I like that. That's a great way to end the show. A little bit of optimism in a cloud of uncertainty.
There you go.
That sounds like our show, Bill.
Yeah, pretty much, right? In a nutshell, that's right. So, Dan, thank you so much for coming on the show. The conversation was outstanding, I thought. Really enjoy it. Every time you come on, it's a great perspective that Keith and I look forward to every time. Dan can be found on the Emerald City Sportscast on the currently 365 network, soon to be fully independent once again, as most of you that knew Dan before the Emerald City Sportscast, you knew him from the Dan Cave podcast, and sounds like you're going down a similar role because you just like it better.
Yeah, more flexibility, more ability to adapt to news as it happens, and to go as long or as short as I need to. But also, it is available. Even the live shows are immediately then available on Apple Podcasts and Spotify and Stitcher and all the places that you get podcasts. And so you can go there now and subscribe to that. Once we're out of the live window, also, so starting in April. All the shows will be live streamed on YouTube. And so go to the Emerald City Sportscast YouTube channel and subscribe to that for notifications.
And you can also find Dan on Twitter at Seahawks Forever.
Yes. Thank you for the plug.
All right. And Keith, it was great having you on here. I just love our conversations all the time. And to add a third element into here is just another just fun thing to add into the show, and makes everything just super enjoyable. We've got some great guests coming up on the show in the next couple of months, and we'll make those announcements as we get closer to those. Working on a few things in the background that I think everyone will enjoy. You can find Keith on Twitter at Myers NFL. I'm at NW Seahawk. The show is at Hawks Playbook on Twitter. Seahawksplaybook.com has all of the shows on our own website, and go to your favorite podcast app and look up Seahawks Playbook Podcast, and make sure you hit the subscribe button. And YouTube, we are on YouTube. This is like our 5th month on YouTube. We could use a lot more subscribers, and so hit that subscribe button when you get.
It's really been 5 months on YouTube
since September. I think we started in September.
You guys aren't millionaires yet?
Huh.
I thought isn't that what's supposed to happen?
Send them my way, Dan. Send them my way.
All I know is if anyone's making any money off of this, it's Bill, because I'm not seeing any. And the thing is, I'm okay with that. I do this for fun. I get the chance to get on here and talk with a friend about Seahawks football, and
there you go.
I'm okay with it.
Perfect.
So.
All right. So
thanks,
as each week we do say, until next time, go Hawks.
Go Hawks.
Seahawks Playbook podcast listeners, thanks for joining us for another edition of the show. You can find us on Twitter. Bill is at NW Seahawk. Keith is at Myers NFL. And the show is at Hawks Playbook. You can listen and subscribe to the show at SeahawksPlaybook.com.